Ever wondered how tasks are organized in a sequence? Well, that's where the concept of sequential logic comes into play. It's a fascinating and vital principle that helps in organizing tasks in a methodical and efficient way. Now you might ask, what is sequential logic? Sequential logic is a system that requires all activities that logically precede a given activity to be complete before the given activity can start. In simpler terms, if you have a task B that follows task A, you can't start task B until task A is finished. It's like dominoes, the next one can't fall until the one before it does. But it doesn't stop there. Sequential logic also stipulates that all activities that logically succeed a given activity cannot start until the given activity is complete. So if you have task A followed by tasks B and C, neither B nor C can commence until A is done. It's a logical sequence, a chain of actions where each link depends on the one before it. This principle is not just a theoretical concept, it's a practical tool used extensively in project management, computer programming, and even in our daily lives. Think about it. You can't put on your shoes before your socks, or can't eat your lunch before cooking it. These are simple examples of sequential logic at work. The beauty of sequential logic lies in its simplicity and effectiveness. It ensures that each task is completed in its rightful order, preventing confusion, chaos, and inefficiencies. It's almost like a conductor orchestrating a symphony, where each musician plays their part in the perfect sequence to create a harmonious performance. In the world of sequential logic, we also talk about predecessor and successor activities. A predecessor activity is any activity that must be completed before a given activity can start, while a successor activity is any activity that cannot start until a given activity has been completed. But remember, these terms are relative to the activity of interest, meaning an activity can be both a predecessor and successor, depending on the context. That's the basic concept of sequential logic. Now let's dive deeper. Now, you might be wondering, what do we mean by activities that logically precede or succeed a given activity, right? Well, let's dive straight into it. When we talk about a predecessor activity, we are referring to any activity that needs to be completed before another specific activity can begin. Let's say you're baking a cake. The act of preheating the oven is a predecessor activity to placing the cake batter in the oven. It's a necessary step that must be completed before you can move on to the next one. On the other hand, a successor activity is any activity that cannot start until a specific activity has been completed. To continue with our baking example, you can't frost the cake, which is a successor activity, until it has been baked and cooled. The predecessor activities. So you see, the terms predecessor and successor are relative to the activity of interest. In the context of our cake baking, preheating the oven is a predecessor to baking the cake, but it's also a successor to buying the ingredients. In the same vein, baking the cake is a successor activity to preheating the oven, but it's also a predecessor to letting the cake cool. This relativity makes it possible for individual activities to be both a predecessor and successor, depending on the activity you're focusing on. This concept becomes incredibly vital when dealing with complex projects where hundreds or even thousands of tasks need to be coordinated and sequenced logically. It helps to identify the order in which tasks should be completed, allowing project managers to plan, schedule, and execute projects efficiently. So, to recap, a predecessor activity is any activity that must be completed before a given activity can start. Meanwhile, a successor activity is any activity that cannot start until a given activity has been completed. So, individual network activities can be both a predecessor and successor activity depending on the network activity. This understanding of predecessor and successor activities is key to mastering the concept of sequential logic, which we'll continue to explore in the following scenes. Still finding it a bit abstract? Don't worry, let's take an example to illustrate this concept. Imagine you're building a house. The process isn't as simple as just stacking bricks on top of each other. There's a clear sequence of activities that need to be followed. The foundation must be laid before the walls can go up, and the walls must be completed before the roof can be installed. In this case, laying the foundation is the predecessor activity to building the walls. And building the walls is the predecessor activity to installing the roof. Conversely, installing the roof is a successor activity to building the walls. And building the walls is a successor activity to laying the foundation. Or consider the process of getting ready in the morning. You can't put on your shoes before you put on your socks, and you can't put on your socks before you've gotten out of bed. In this sequence, getting out of bed is the predecessor activity to putting on your socks. And putting on your socks is the predecessor to putting on your shoes. Each of these activities is a successor to the one that came before it. In each of these examples, the tasks must be completed in a specific order. If they aren't, the entire process could be thrown off. For instance, if you try to put up the walls of a house before the foundation is laid, the walls could collapse. If you try to frost a cake before it's cooled, the frosting could melt. And if you try to put on your shoes before your socks, well, that's just uncomfortable. These examples might seem simple, but the concept of sequential logic applies to much more complex situations as well. It's used in fields like project management, computer science, and manufacturing to ensure that tasks are completed in the most efficient order possible. This is why understanding sequential logic is so important. It helps us to organize tasks, manage our time, and work more efficiently. Whether you're building a house, baking a cake, or getting ready in the morning, sequential logic is at play. It's a fundamental component of how we structure our lives and our work. As seen from these examples, sequential logic is a crucial concept in organizing tasks efficiently. So where do we apply this concept of sequential logic? Sequential logic is like the invisible glue that holds our daily activities and major projects together. It's not just an abstract concept taught in classrooms, but a fundamental principle that finds application in various fields. Let's dive into project management. Here, sequential logic plays a crucial role. It helps to organize tasks in a manner that ensures the efficient use of resources and time. By identifying predecessor and successor activities, project managers can create a logical sequence of tasks. This logic helps to avoid any potential overlapping of activities and ensures that the project is completed within the estimated timeline. Now shift your focus to computer science. Ever wondered how your computer processes information? It's all thanks to sequential logic. It forms the backbone of digital circuits and systems, including the central processing unit of your computer. Sequential circuits, unlike combinational circuits, have an element of memory. They remember their history, that is the sequence of inputs, which influences their current output. Even in everyday life, sequential logic is at play. When you prepare a meal, you follow a recipe. This recipe is a perfect example of sequential logic. You can't just throw all the ingredients into a pot at once. Certain steps precede others. You chop the vegetables before sautéing them. You don't serve the meal before it's cooked. Sequential logic is also the key to learning new skills. You can't run before you walk, and you can't play a Mozart symphony on the piano without first learning the basics of music theory and practicing scales. In all these examples, it's clear that sequential logic enables us to increase efficiency, save time, and avoid mistakes. It's a tool that helps us make sense of the world, organize complex tasks, and achieve our goals. Sequential logic, thus, plays a pivotal role in our daily lives and professional spheres. Before we wrap up, here's a quick recap of what we learned today. We dived into the fascinating world of sequential logic, a concept that demands all logically preceding activities to be completed before the next can start. This concept also ensures that no activity logically succeeding a current activity can begin until the current one is finished. We explored the roles of predecessor and successor activities. Remember, a predecessor activity is any activity that must be completed before a given activity can start. On the flip side, a successor activity cannot start until a given activity has been completed. These definitions aren't static, as an activity can be both a predecessor and successor depending on the network activity. We also discussed the importance of sequential logic. It's an invaluable tool for planning and organizing tasks, ensuring efficiency and accuracy. And that's sequential logic for you. The next time you're planning your tasks, remember to apply this concept for better efficiency.